let's get started. This is COVID-19 and the road to recovery. It has not been a straight road, it has been a winding road. But we are moving forward in some respects and a little stalled in other respects, but we'll talk about that today. My name is Dr. Valda Crowder, also known as Dr. V. I'm an emergency medicine physician for 30 years now, and I've treated patients across pandemics and mass shootings and natural disasters. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and my handles are at the bottom of every slide. And the articles and source documentations are at AskDrV.us. The other thing, which I get asked a lot about, is where can people see old presentations? So old presentations are also on the AskDrV.us site. Now, every day from henceforward, we are going to also add a topic that is about wellness and health empowerment. So today we're going to talk about genetics in your family tree, because that was a request. If you have a specific request or something that you want to actually learn more about or know more about, send it to me, and your topic will be covered on the second half of this presentation. All right, so let's go. The structure is a slide presentation followed by Q&A. From beginning to end, it's about 60 minutes. You can put questions in the Q&A or the chat while this presentation is going on. So you can just load them up. You don't have to remember anything or write anything down. You could just go ahead and load them up. All righty. The intention is to keep participants informed about COVID-19 science that will help you and your family stay healthy during the pandemic. The outcome is that you're going to leave the webinar motivated to create or improve an action plan for yourself or your family. And as we move through COVID and we take on these other topics, I also want people to actually create or improve an action plan for the overall wellness of themselves, their family, and a broader community, whether or not it be a homeowners association, a church, an employment setting, etc. Our CDC director actually said about 2 weeks ago that she's very concerned about an impending fourth wave of COVID cases. That's why everyone is really scrambling to get as many people vaccinated as possible, as quickly as possible. Right now, unvaccinated folks are driving the coronavirus surge as we begin to open up. The only person that I've actually heard of that was vaccinated and ended up hospitalized with COVID, which I did have a case, not me personally, but I did hear about, was in a transplant patient. And as you know, transplant patients have very, very, very depressed immune systems, which is required for the transplant to actually take. Globally, we have reached 143 million cases, and we just surpassed 3 million people dead worldwide. In the United States, we have reached 32 million cases with 580,000 people dead. Probably by next week, we're going to surpass 600,000. Now, one of the things that is important is that we are looking at COVID-19 state by state. We're also looking at it as the United States, but then you have to also look at it worldwide. So worldwide, COVID-19 cases and deaths are accelerating. So this is very, very, very concerning. The worldwide population actually experienced more cases than they ever have in a single week this last week. And that is very, very concerning, because as we actually begin to you have all these other countries where COVID-19 is still growing extremely rapidly, you have mutations. That is where mutations are born. And then a whole new virus can circulate and impact the worldwide population. The biggest hotspot right now is Brazil. This is what it is actually looking like in Brazil. They're topping over 100,000 new cases a day. So that is very, very, very concerning. Some folks ask me about Michigan and Texas. And as you see, Michigan kind of actually is going through a second uptick, whereas Texas actually is going down. So these are two states that right around the same time opened up and eliminated their mask mandate and went back to doing what they're doing. So a lot of folks are saying, well, what's the difference? Texas didn't really see a COVID surge after opening or ending its mask mandate. Why? This is actually a really good article, and it kind of goes over why. So there's a couple of things. One is that Texas had very weak mitigation protocols from the very beginning and had a higher percentage of its population that had already been infected with COVID. The other thing is that you have to realize that Texas is warmer than Michigan. We all know that, but this is the impact of the virus in a cold environment versus a warm environment. Again, COVID-19, if it's 52 degrees or less, you will actually see the virus actually hang in the air longer. So this is what we're actually seeing when we look at the difference between Texas and Michigan. So this was a question that I had last week from one of our participants. Is Texas surging like Michigan? No, it is not. Texas is warmer. Houston hasn't reported a surge of coronavirus cases, but the hospitals are actually saying there's a jump in admissions and also a jump in ICU admissions. So you do have people getting sicker, most likely because they're getting a variant, they're getting infected by a variant that is stronger and more virile. Now, so this is why I tell people, don't let your guard down, keep cleaning, keep washing your hands, keep wearing a mask, socially distancing when you're indoors around people that are unvaccinated. Fauci describes COVID-19 as an extraordinary virus, and I tell people it's extraordinary because of its ability to actually infect people and they be asymptomatic. They can also transmit while asymptomatic, and then also because of its ability to actually mutate. Study found that Black women are 3 times more likely to die from COVID-19 when compared to white men. Black men are actually more likely than Black women to die from COVID-19. And Black men specifically have seen a 3-year loss in life expectancy as a result of COVID-19. As we all know, it's highly contagious, takes 45 seconds to infect others. The variants take less than 45 seconds. 60 to 80% of the people that get exposed to COVID-19 that are not vaccinated will come down with COVID-19. All right, so let's talk about these vaccines. So as we know, the virus is inside a fatty layer. There's spike proteins on the surface. The spike proteins connect with the receptor protein, and that's what allows the virus to open up and get inside of a cell. Once it gets into the cell, it replicates. This replicating process is where it is occurring over and over and over again. So there's 1 trillion cells in someone's body. So one person getting infected by COVID-19 means that this virus is replicating millions of times in one person. So when you actually have 1 million people that are infected, that's 1 million times 1 million, and you'll see how much replication you're actually getting. Every replication allows this virus to improve. It gives it an opportunity to say, hey, maybe I can change this and evade the medication. Maybe I can change this and evade the decadron. Maybe I can change this and I won't no longer be caught by the vaccine. This is why it is so important that worldwide we clamp down on this particular virus. It replicates, after replication, it reformulates, and then it heads on out. Fauci says developing the COVID-19 vaccine and actually agreeing to put federal funding behind that was one of the best decisions that he ever made or recommended to the president at the time. Moderna and Pfizer are RNA vaccines. They produce the spike protein. Your body recognizes the spike protein as foreign, develops antibodies, and then attacks it. We will probably see with Moderna and Pfizer the need for a booster shot. I would not be surprised if we do not need a booster shot related to variants. Johnson & Johnson, which has been on hold, uses a different approach. It is a viral vector approach. It's the adenovirus, which is a common cold. It alters it to become harmless, connects it with some genetic material from COVID-19, and then teaches the body to generate antibodies to the spike protein. Again, so that the virus cannot attach and renders the virus harmless. So right now, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, which are 94 and 95% and are 2-shot regimens, are the only ones that we are administering. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been paused. but I do believe this is only going to be for a short period of time. Currently, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines give you flu-like symptoms, primarily on the second shot, headache, chills, fatigue. It's really your body actually reacting and having an immunologic reaction. Now, let's talk about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because there's a lot of conversation about that being paused. And as I've said, I think that this is really being paused so they can actually recommend to physicians what to do. So the pause is regarding these reports of clots, and the clots have been in primarily in the head and neck area, although there have been some in other areas. A lot of people are kind of concerned, you know, why are they pausing this when birth control pills also cause clots? Well, let's talk a little bit about it. So it's 6 people out of 6.8 million doses that have gotten clots, 18 to 48 years old. So all 6 have been women. I think there was a 7th that was a man, and it all occurred within 2 weeks of the vaccine. So if you received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, this is not something that you actually need to be concerned about. This is something that we are seeing within 2 to 4 weeks of someone being vaccinated. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just, one of the issues that is before I go on to the variants, one of the issues that is a problem with this particular, with these particular clots is that the clots do not respond to heparin. And normally clots do respond to heparin. So these clots actually get bigger with the administration of heparin. And part of what they're doing is they're pausing to actually train all the physicians. So we have an upcoming, at my hospital, we have an upcoming training on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on May 4th. On that date, May 4th, there is a twice-a-day training. All of the physicians are being required to attend. It's being recorded so that if you actually are working, you can actually see it on your own time. And I would not be surprised if it is then, if the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is restarted somewhere shortly after the middle of May, or around the middle of May, or around that time. All right, so let's go to variants. There's a lot of different variants. So, and this is not an exhaustive list. So as you see here, it just shows kind of where these variants were first detected. And again, UK, Brazil, South Africa, California, these are all places where there's a lot of infection. And we will see more and more of these. The UK variant is now the predominant variant in the United States. It seems like the antibodies and monoclonal antibodies and the vaccines still seem to work. It does have an increased risk of transmission, and it is more severe. The Japanese or Brazil variant seems to actually still be neutralized by antibodies, and we don't know that much about as far as the increased transmission or not. South African virus, absolutely just like the UK virus, has a 50% increased transmission, and there is some reduction in the usefulness of monoclonal antibodies. The California, there are 2 different types of California variants. Both are mildly more transmissible, and both of them have significant impact on neutralization and may not work as well with the antibodies. This just shows that the Pfizer vaccine may be less effective against the South African and UK coronavirus variants. This is according to the Israeli study. Again, most of the studies that you're going to see about the Pfizer vaccine are going to come out of Israel, because Israel traded data for more vaccines. Now, when are you fully vaccinated? 2 weeks after your last shot. How long will your vaccine last? We do not have the answer to that. We are still following people from the original clinical trials, which were almost a year ago, and those patients still seem to have adequate antibodies. I suspect the issue is not going to be how long it lasts. The issue is going to be, does it still cover for the variants that are out here? And I suspect we may need boosters related to the variants, not related to the vaccine in any way, shape, or form wearing off. What can you do when you're fully vaccinated? You can be indoors with other people who are fully vaccinated without wearing a mask and without staying 6 feet apart. So I've gone to some dinner parties with fully vaccinated people. They ask you to keep it to about 6 people or less. You don't want to go into an indoor environment with other vaccinated people and there'd be 50 people. So you want to keep the numbers small. If you are indoors with unvaccinated people, it's recommended that you still wear a mask and still stay 6 feet apart. If you get exposed to COVID-19 and you don't have symptoms, you do not need to quarantine. Now, what precautions do you still need to take? You still need to actually, when you're indoors, actually, the people that you do not live with that are not vaccinated still wear a mask and stay 6 feet apart. Obviously, going into stores, people don't know that you're vaccinated or not, so you just wear a mask, and there's usually other people in the store. They recommend that you get tested only if you're experiencing COVID-19 symptoms, and then to follow CDC and Health Department travel requirements. Now, it looks like the cruise lines are going to require vaccinations in order to travel. And of course, this makes sense because these are large indoor environments. This is an excellent article that just came out today. Several people sent it to me. This is out of the New York Times. I'm sorry, the top of it got cut off. But I've had a lot of questions that people have asked me about flying and how safe are they with flying. The New York Times did this really good article, How Safe Are You from COVID When You Fly? It also has a simulation and it goes over what airflow looks like on a plane. Obviously, you can never be completely safe from COVID if you're going to be locked into a cabin with other people. I recommend trying to be on short flights that are less than an hour, hour and a half. And honestly, for myself, there is no circumstance under which I would take off my mask during a flight. I wouldn't be drinking water. I wouldn't take off my mask for any reason. But this is a very good article to actually go over what it actually looks like. Mexico, Brazil, and Philippines, all areas that actually have very large COVID infections, are getting vaccines from COVAX. We talked about earlier back in March what COVAX was, and it's basically different organizations that come together and try to provide vaccinations to countries with lower GDP. The goal of COVAX is to provide enough vaccines to vaccinate 20% of the population. And that's basically to help these countries sort of get a start with vaccination. I'm telling people really watch what's going on in Brazil. It's very important what we're seeing there. I think we're really looking at a collapse of their healthcare system. There's not enough oxygen, there's not enough medication, there's not enough doctors. It's just a really overwhelming situation. Vaccinations from COVAX will make a huge difference. One of the things that is also important is that Brazil started administering the Chinese vaccine, and the Chinese vaccine was found only to be 50% effective against the Brazilian variant. So this is another reason why they are really having a lot of problems down in Brazil. A lot of folks ask me, well, if I'm vaccinated, then I can't give COVID to anybody, can I? So we don't know the answer to that yet. So scientists are recruiting thousands of college students to actually test that. So they're vaccinating them and then they're testing them from COVID to see whether or not they still transmit COVID-19 while vaccinated. One of the things that was found in an Israeli study was that it seemed that with vaccination, if you did catch or if you did get pollinated with COVID, you spread it for a much shorter period of time and about 94% to 95% lower number of viral particles when you did transmit it. We're doing really good. We have 211 million vaccines being administered. I mean, that is really phenomenal. I did not think that we would be here this fast. I am really, really happy about it. Um, the states have done a good job. The federal government has done a good job. FEMA has set up a lot of sites. Churches have gotten into the action. So it's really been an all hands on deck. There's really not that many 50 million doses that are yet to be delivered that are in, in storage somewhere. That's really not a lot. These most of the vaccines that have been delivered have been administered. This is unfortunate. 40% of Marines have declined to receive a vaccine. I do believe that this is a national security threat. We don't want to have our troops going abroad and being exposed to a killer like COVID. So some folks have asked me, how do I talk to my friends and family who may be hesitant to get vaccinated? So the first thing I would say is, don't make them wrong and listen to what they have to say, because their point of view is just as legitimate as your point of view. You really want to make sure that you keep an open line of communication and that you're someone that they can come back and talk to, and they feel safe expressing their concerns, and also they feel safe talking about how their decision is changing over time. I encourage them to talk with their doctor, remind them that qualified people studied the vaccine, and remind them that medical professionals have taken it all across the country. Also, it's really important when people talk about the side effects of COVID. This is really a risk versus reward conversation. There are side effects with the vaccine, but there are more severe side effects with a COVID-19 infection. Point out that they're helping other people by being vaccinated so they don't transmit it to other folks. And also, it's going to allow them to help us all get back to life more normally, more quickly. One of the things that we're seeing now that Israel has vaccinated, I think, over 70% of its adult population. They are now able to go about their business without mask outdoors, and then they just put on masks indoors. So some folks wanted to laminate the vaccine card. Make sure you've completed the entire immunization series and verify the information that is accurate, and make a copy of the front and back. Just in case you need a booster, you might want to add the booster to that particular copy. Dr. Burke said COVID-19 deaths after the first 100,000 could have been prevented. This is really, really, really unfortunate, as we actually surpassed 600,000 people dead between today and probably next week. This is a lot of people's family members, friends, loved ones, etc. We really have to make sure that faced with the same set of consequences and facts, that we actually really do the right thing. They have announced a hotline where you can apply for a COVID funeral aid. The death certificate must state that the death was COVID-19 related in order to qualify. There was a website, but they've now actually created a hotline to actually make it easier. All right, so our wellness topic today, and I really enjoyed putting this one together. So I really want people to look at and actually understand their genetics and the importance of their family tree. A lot of times we forget, how important that really is. So I figured let's start off with the dogs, because everybody knows, or maybe I don't know if everybody knows, but there's certain diseases that run in dogs. And just like there's certain diseases that are transmitted in dogs, there's certain diseases that are transmitted in us. So when you look at Dobermans, Terriers, and Welsh Corgis, they have von Willebrand syndrome, which is a blood disorder in which the blood does not clot properly. Dobermans are actually 26% of them are affected, and 49% are carriers. With the Terriers and Welsh Corgis, only 4 to 6% are affected, but you still have about 35% of them that are carriers. So you can breed them, and you can see how this can easily continue and propagate. Similarly, hypothyroidism. There are certain dogs where their thyroid does not make enough thyroid hormone. English setters, a third of them are affected. Polish lowland sheepdogs, 30%, and Havanese, 25.6%. Now, this is another disease that is very important, retinal atrophy. And now this is where they actually lose their photoreceptor cells, and over time they become blind. You'll see this in American Eskimos, mountain dogs, cattle dogs, Cocker Spaniels, Portuguese water dog, which is the Obama dog, as well as the Nova Scotia drug trolling retriever. So, and lastly, oh, I forgot about this one. This one actually is a seizure disorder. So seizure disorders are a burst of electrical activity. I know a lot of people didn't realize dogs can have seizures, but they absolutely can have seizures. It's an uncontrolled shaking for less than a minute or so. And 77% of this Belgian Terruvian actually have seizure disorders. So certain illnesses are very, very common and go in lineages. So let's talk about the importance for us. There's a couple of key things you want to look for when you look at your family history. If you have a family member that caught cancer at 80 or 90 years old, that's not particularly important. What is important is someone who has a disease that they've caught it earlier than the age that is expected. So for instance, if you have a family member who's gotten breast cancer or colon cancer at 30 or 35 years old, that's something that's very, very important. A disease in more than one close relative, like you have a sister, a mother that both had breast cancer. A disease that does not usually affect a certain breast cancer, a certain gender. So for instance, breast cancer in a male. That is something that we will see sort of run in families. And then any combination of things that you see that's pretty common, breast cancer and ovarian cancer, heart disease and diabetes. I have some of my friends, one of my friends said his family, we all have bad hearts. We all have bad hearts. So these are the sorts of trends that you actually want to look for in your family history. Now, how do you map out your family history? One, ask it questions. Talk at family gatherings. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is all death certificates are publicly available. If you are wondering what Aunt Kim died of, you can actually pull her birth certificate, usually costs maybe $10 to $20, and you can actually see what was on the death certificate. So all death certificates of everyone in this country are publicly available. You can also collect information from grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, nieces, assuming they're willing to share that. You want to write it down and share it with your doctor. And there's a lot of also genealogy apps that are also available. Now, lastly, there's genetic testing, and genetic testing is done in a lot of different scenarios. So I mentioned this, and I started off talking about dogs because in the veterinary community, there's a lot of genetic testing that is done on dogs and cats. And I think it's important for us to actually reach out and actually do our genetic testing. So what is a genetic test? It can be performed from either a sample of blood, hair, skin, saliva, or amniotic fluid. So it's sometimes done prenatally. There's all different types of genetic tests. So there's newborn screening, which is actually done when the child is a newborn, and it's used to identify genetic disorders that could be treated early in life. Then you have diagnostic testing. This is actually done to actually check for a specific chromosomal condition. So for instance, does someone have Down syndrome? Then you also have carrier testing. It's used to identify people who have one copy of a gene mutation that when two copies are present actually causes the disease. So a carrier does not have the disease, but they have an increased likelihood of passing it on. So think about someone who has sickle cell trait, but they don't have sickle cell anemia. Prenatal testing often occurs from the amniotic fluid, and it is done before a child is born and usually before 20 weeks to actually look at the genes and chromosomes before birth. There's also pre-implantation testing. This is done when a woman is going for in vitro fertilization. They may have an embryo and they actually want to check the embryo to make sure that to check to see if it has any genetic or chromosomal disorder before they actually implant it into the uterus. Then there's predictive or pre-symptomatic testing, which uses used to detect gene mutations associated with disorders that appear after birth or often later in life. And lastly, there's forensic testing. This is what you actually see done when you see DNA testing used in rape and murder cases, etc. So that is forensic testing. So most of us are actually doing predictive or pre-symptomatic genetic testing if we actually go and do 21andMe or one of those types of genetic tests. All right, let's go to question and answer. All righty.